Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in remembering the events at Lockerbie 30 years ago. I remember the silence that fell on this entire building when the news came out of what had happened at Lockerbie. And for the people of Lockerbie, the trauma lives on. And for the families of the victims, it also lives on. And we should remember them today. Mr. Speaker, can I also take this opportunity to wish you and all members of the House and everyone around our country a very happy Christmas, and particularly to those that have to work over Christmas and, of course, our armed services that will also be on duty over the Christmas period, and all the best for a peaceful and welcome 2019. Mr. Speaker, well, I've gained acquiescence. My Christmas good wishes do extend to everyone over there as well. However, until then, Mr. Speaker, I just have to say this. The Prime Minister has plunged this country into a national crisis.
Yes.
She refused Parliament the right to vote on her Brexit deal.
Yeah.
She said that she did that to seek further assurances. She failed. She's now claiming that she is still seeking further assurances, while all the time running down the clock on the alternatives. So can the Prime Minister explain to us when the European Council will meet to approve the changes that they have already ruled out?
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, we are indeed still working with the European Union. We have discussions with the European Union to seek those assurances that this House wanted us to seek. Can I just correct the Right Honourable Gentleman on one particular point? He referenced the issue of the meaningful vote. We will have that meaningful vote here in the House. I set out earlier this week, well, there's absolutely no point in members on the other side of the House shouting out when, because I set out in the statement on Monday when that will take place. But can I just say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, week after week he has stood here on this issue and talked about what he's against. He never says what he's for. So if he wants to fulfil the will of the referendum, to support jobs, to end free movement, to do those trade deals, to avoid no deal, then he needs to vote for this deal. He can talk all he likes about a meaningful vote. All he gives us is a meaningless position.
Mr. Speaker, we should have had the vote a week ago. The Prime Minister denied Parliament the opportunity to have that vote. And she's still unclear as to when it will actually take place. Mr. Speaker, there are no meetings of the European Union Council scheduled until the 21st of March. And the EU has been very clear. There are no more negotiations, clarifications or meetings. She will be bringing back the same deal she pulled last week. It's an intolerable situation, and she's simply playing for time. And on Monday, in a response to a question from the Honourable Member for Belfast North on the backstop, she said, "I'm seeking further political and legal assurances in relation to those issues which can be achieved in a number of ways." The Prime Minister must clearly set out now how will she achieve these legally binding assurances before the House is due to return on the 7th of January.
We will set out what is achieved in our EU discussions when we return in the new year, when we have had those discussions, when we bring those assurances back. But can I just say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he can get as angry as he likes about this issue, but it doesn't hide the fact that he has no Brexit plan. And I know it's Christmas. I know he's looked in his stocking, down the chimney, under the Christmas tree. He still hasn't found a Brexit plan. He has to accept his responsibility to deliver on Brexit.
Order! Order. You're normally, Mr. Yassine, a most composed, almost laid-back individual. You're becoming very hot-headed. I'm worried for your own sake. Calm down. Be a good fellow. The Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman has to accept his responsibility for delivering on Brexit. And, there are some people that say that the Leader of the Opposition just going through the motions. What we saw this week is he isn't even doing that.
Mr. Speaker, it's the Prime Minister who's supposed to be undertaking the negotiation. It's the Prime Minister that's failed to bring an acceptable deal back. And if she doesn't like doing it, then step aside and let somebody else do it. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that she is stalling for...
Order. I made it clear that the Prime Minister must not be shouted down. No one should even bother trying to shout down the Leader of the Opposition. It won't work against the Prime Minister, and it won't work against the Right Honourable Gentleman. End of subject. Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, the reality is that the Prime Minister is stalling for time. There is still no majority for her shoddy deal in this House. It isn't stoical, it's cynical. And as the Honourable Member for East Surrey said, we have displacement activity designed to distract from last week's failed renegotiation. The International Trade Secretary said, and I quote, "I think that it is very difficult to support the deal if we don't get changes to the backstop. I'm not even sure if the Cabinet will agree for it to be put to the House of Commons." So can the Prime Minister give us a cast iron guarantee the vote in this House will not be delayed yet again?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, we have been very clear about the process that we are going through, and we have been very clear about when the vote will be brought back to this House. Now, of course, the details of that debate have to be discussed in the usual channels in the usual way. But the right honourable gentleman made a response when I said he had a responsibility on delivering Brexit. Every member of this House has a responsibility to deliver on Brexit. This is because, and 80% of the votes cast for members of this House were for members of this House who stood on a manifesto commitment to honour the referendum and deliver on Brexit. And what people will say to the right honourable gentleman, if he fails to recognise that he has a duty, as has everybody in this House, to deliver on Brexit, that once again he's just bottled it.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister didn't answer my question about a cast iron guarantee. She is the one that has denied Parliament the right to vote on this subject. So please, no lectures to Parliament when it's the Prime Minister that's denying MPs the possibility of a vote on this. We should have had a vote a week ago. We should now be debating practical alternatives. She is behaving in a disgraceful way that is frankly an outrage. Mr. Speaker, no deal would be a disaster for our country, and no responsible government would ever allow it. Just 2 weeks ago, the Chancellor said preparations for leaving with no deal could not be done in a matter of months. They would take years to complete. No deal is simply not an option. So why doesn't the Prime Minister stop the pretence and stop wasting £4 billion in a cynical attempt to drive her deeply damaging deal through this House?
If the right honourable gentleman doesn't want to see money being spent on no deal, he's got an easy answer. Vote for this deal.
Mr. Speaker, what the Prime Minister is doing is a criminal waste of money. She is recklessly running down...
Order! Order. In this House of Commons, where we're supposed to try to treat each other with respect, no one, under any circumstances, is going to be shouted down. So stop the attempted shouting down on both sides, abandon the juvenile finger-wagging which achieves precisely nothing, and let each other be heard. It's called the assertion of democratic principle. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is recklessly running down the clock, all in a shameful attempt to make her own bad deal look like the lesser of two evils. With rising crime, 20,000 fewer police on our streets, 100,000 vacancies in our National Health Service, and the worst performance for any November on record last month, how can the Prime Minister justify wasting that money on no deal that cannot and will not happen?
I say to the right honourable gentleman that until a deal has been ratified, it is the responsible position of government, and would be the responsible position of any government to put in place contingency arrangements for no deal. But I repeat to him, if he wants to ensure that we leave the European Union with a deal, then he has to put into practice what he's saying and actually vote for a deal. And he talks, yet again, he talks about issues like the question of the number of police officers and money going into the police. We put extra money, they've made extra money available to the police this year. We made extra money available to the police, and what did the Labour Party do? They voted against it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister should stop dithering and put it to the vote of the House. Let the House make a decision on it. Her friend, the Honourable Member for Totnes, is right, is she not, when she said that the threat of no deal, and I quote, is an absolute disgrace. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, has thrown away 2 years on her botched negotiations. She's now recklessly wasting £4 billion of public money. She's holding Parliament and the country to ransom. She is irresponsibly risking jobs, investment and our industries. There have been no changes, so she must put her deal to the vote. Parliament must take back control. There is no majority in this House for no deal, Mr. Speaker. Isn't this just a deeply cynical manoeuvre from a failing and utterly reckless Prime Minister?
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, it's a bit rich him standing here and talking about dithering. Let's see what the Labour Party did this week. They said they would call a vote of no confidence. Then they said they wouldn't. Then he said he would. Then it wasn't effective. I know it's Christmas. I know it's Christmas.
Order! Members must not shout at the Prime Minister. Order! Calm yourselves. Try to get into the Christmas spirit. Or if you can't do that, at least listen to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They said they'd put down a vote of no confidence. Then they said they wouldn't. Then they said they would. Then they did it, but it wasn't effective. I know it's the Christmas season and the pantomime season, but what do we see from the Labour front bench and the right honourable gentleman? He's going to put a confidence vote. Oh, yes, he is. Oh, no, he isn't. I've got some news for him. I've got some advice for the right honourable gentleman. Look behind you.